What do you think is the like number one leadership trait that has most helped you successfully transfer, from being an athlete to being a business owner? What's like the one top trait that you would say?
I think this is a kind of embodies maybe multiple traits because it by itself will not allow you to be successful. But the one thing that I've always had, and it's kind of an ego thing to be honest, but this idea that like if somebody else, they say, okay, if you want to be a professional athlete, it's the 1% of the 1%. And that's supposed to scare people off.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that's always been like, okay, why not me? And if somebody else can do it, I can do it. Like I have that level of competitiveness to where when someone says something is difficult or is not doable, et cetera, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Hmm.
And I think that allows you to, that focus that I talked about, I think it brings out that focus, that determination to create all those other things.
I'm Julie B, and you're playing the game of leadership. Hey there, I'm Julie B, and this is the Game of Leadership. On this show, I interview athletes who have become entrepreneurs and business leaders about how their experience as an athlete has elevated their leadership in their businesses. Today, I am so excited to have Keith Marshall, the co founder and CEO of the Players Lounge, on the show. Before starting his business, Keith played football as a running back for the University of Georgia Bulldogs, and then he went on to be drafted to the NFL by the Washington Commanders. I know we're just going to have a fantastic conversation about leadership and business and how playing sports has helped Keith become a successful entrepreneur. And I'm really excited for him to also talk about what he's doing today because it's so, so needed in this industry. So, Keith, welcome to the Game of Leadership. Thank you for being here and being with our audience.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to have the conversation.
So, Keith, yeah, let's get into it. Tell us about the Players Lounge, how you got started, and what you all do.
Absolutely. So in a funny way, the Players Lounge is a part of a lifelong pursuit or kind of the culmination of a lifelong pursuit. So you mentioned my background a little bit, go a little bit deeper into it. I was a lifetime athlete. My father played professionally. So, I was always super into sports. It was always kind of that North Star for me. Ended up graduating high school as the top ranked running back in the country, went to the University of Georgia where I had a great start. And then my second year, I blew out my knee, had double knee surgery, and that was kind of an inflection point where I realized that football wasn't forever. I realized it was important for me to build my brand while I was in school so that it could sustain me afterwards. Realized that it was important to kind of take academics a little bit more seriously. So I switched over to finance. I got more involved in the business side of sports, particularly at the collegiate sports level. I was involved at UGA and a lot of the different student athlete committees that were lobbying for additional resources for student athletes, lobbying for the opportunity to get paid, even though this was 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really think that was my introduction into what I'm doing now. As you mentioned, I went and played in the NFL for a few years, got fortunate enough to do that. But ultimately, the injury bug kind of stuck with me, and I didn't get to have the long and illustrious career that I had hoped. So in 2019, I transitioned out, went and got an MBA, really thought I was going to go the management consultant route. And then the Players Lounge happened. It was super organic. It was a side project. Me and a few of my teammates that played together at Georgia in November of 2021, we had a dinner. There was a lot of excitement around UGA at that time. We were headed
Yeah.
towards our first national championship
Mm-hmm.
in years. NIL, I think, passed that July. So there was now the opportunity for student athletes to get compensated for the value that they were creating. Then lastly, which is not as important now, there was a Web3 boom. So everybody was excited about, Web3 and NFTs and digitalization and all of these other things. And so when we got started, it was a cool idea. The idea was because of NIL, there was an opportunity to recreate the industry's value chain in a way that allowed athletes to get compensated for the value that they bring. And so, if you think about the way that the way that athletes drive value, it's through experiences with fans, through obviously the content itself, and then through commerce. And so, we wanted to focus on the media, the experiences first. So we looked at companies like Rivals, 247 on three, and all of these companies are generating millions and millions of dollars annually. The core of the content is driven by student athletes, but again, they didn't get paid. So the initial model was let's pay these athletes to do the interviews. Let's give them a piece of the upside when we go sell this content. And then let's have a much more immersive experience leveraging some of the new technologies that were available. So that's what we're doing. I mean, obviously, over the last year and a half, and I'm sure we'll get into it, it's changed a lot. We've had to pivot kind of our go to market, but at the core of it, what we're really building is a way for athletes to participate in that value. And then also the ability for athletes to brand themselves while they're in the spotlight, because as we know, a lot of athletes do not get to go play for a
Yeah.
long time professionally, and that may be the pinnacle of kind of their notoriety while they're in school. So we want to provide a platform for them to leverage that.
I'm really excited to see where this whole conversation goes. I've been a big fan of college football for my entire life, and I remember even at a young age thinking like, why aren't they getting paid more than a full ride? I mean, a full ride is fantastic, and I'm not wanting to minimize that, but a lot of them don't get that, and a lot of people don't understand that does not include a lot of things. So it's so needed. I'm so glad that they've made the rules that they can now be compensated for the content that you are helping them get compensated for. That is really exciting. So Keith, I did want to just circle back for a minute though. You said after you had your knee injury, you went into finance. You went to major in finance. Did you have an interest before you had your knee injury when you were probably thinking like I'm going to go to the NFL, have that long career because you certainly had the you I mean you were that talented to do that. Were you interested in entrepreneurship though before the injury?
I absolutely was. My father was an entrepreneur. I watched him for years run
Okay.
his own real estate, company where he bought properties. He had, renters, and he did very, very well. And so, being an entrepreneur in kind of that sense, he was able to establish his own schedule. He's able to be very involved in my life, and he had a certain level of freedom to operate as he saw fit. And so, growing up watching him, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I did not necessarily focus on developing those skills though
Mm-hmm.
because I was so focused on athletics. And so before I switched, I was a business management major, which is very broad. As I'm sure you know, there's no like specific function that you go into. And so, part of the switch was finance is a big part of anything that you do, understanding numbers, understanding how to drive and create value. So that's why I did that switch to get me a little bit closer to some of the skills I knew would be important down the line.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a professional CPA, an accountant, and here I am doing these interviews. So it's funny though that experience in school has helped me so much in business. I wouldn't trade it, but it's just I'm not doing that at all. So it's interesting how in college our paths usually change. So Keith, what is your favorite part about being a business owner? What do you just love about doing it?
So it's I think I mentioned the autonomy and the freedom, and that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you get to operate without responsibility. But I do, for example, I'm not necessarily the earliest riser in the world. I'm somebody that can stay up until 3, 4 o'clock, punching the clock and being productive. And so, having the freedom over my own schedule and being able to kind of set the pace of things helps me a lot. Kind of optimize my schedule. The other thing that I really have enjoyed, and part of what I was going to do before I decided to do this, like I said, I was going to go into management consulting, and
Mm-hmm.
the appeal there was you get to operate across a range of functions, a range of industries. You get to learn a lot. You get to really figure out what you're good at and what you enjoy doing. And so I thought I was going to be losing that with this entrepreneurship, but it turns out I think I'm actually getting more of an experience doing that
Yeah.
because we don't have the huge team, or there's not an unlimited budget and things of that nature. I've had to get very familiar with the capital structure, raising capital, or understanding IP law and trademark law and strategy and hiring people and negotiating, like pretty much all the things that you have to do as a part of a business to make that business function successfully. I've had to do myself. And so I've just learned a tremendous amount over the last couple of years, really last year. And that's been really exciting for me. I think it will position me well long term. And then the last thing that I'll say, and I'll kind of tie this into TPL, is just like a challenging environment. I think a lot of people don't necessarily embrace
Mm.
challenging environments, but everything that I've ever done that's been challenging has been, on the other end of what's been most meaningful in terms of what I've been able to accomplish and the things that I kind of hold near and dear. And so this experience has been extremely challenging, but I do feel like, working towards something that will mean something to me down the line.
And I think that the freedom that you talk about, that's one of the reasons that I often hear, but it's a double-edged sword because freedom doesn't mean I think people who are not business owners who have never had like the entrepreneurial experience or seeing other entrepreneurs in their life think that we're just kind of getting up whenever we want to and doing whatever we want to and then just doing whatever we want to whatever we want to. That's not really the case, but it is nice to be able to kind of control when we do what we do most of the time.
Absolutely. And I'll say actually that's been one of the I think, to talk about kind of the downsides or the one
Mm-hmm.
negative I've been able to pinpoint from my career to athletics, any athletics, how this transition is, as an athlete, you have a coach, you have a
Yeah.
schedule, you have benchmarks you have to hit. Like it's very well defined for you and structured out. And now, you lose that and you become the person that has to establish that structure and kind of those benchmarks. So that has been a learning for sure.
Yeah. So speaking a little bit about your just your athletic career, How have you seen that both help you in some ways, like what you've learned there, and also maybe hinder you in some ways? Some of the other people I've interviewed have they've had an interesting take on how being a high achiever, high performer has actually hindered them a little bit as an entrepreneur. Do you have any takes on those two sides of the coin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is I can go much deeper if you want me to here,
Go
but
for it.
as somebody like an athlete, you're kind of all in. There's
Mm-hmm.
this idea, particularly it was very pervasive while I was at Emory getting an MBA, that work-life balance is the goal, and you want to have a balanced life. And while I do think that's great at certain phases in life,
Mm-hmm.
like when you're in a heavy pursuit that's highly competitive, there's
Yeah.
really not that much space for balance. And so, that has been difficult. One of the things that I recognized when I was transitioning out of ball, which was a very difficult transition, it is for
Yeah.
anybody, as I'm sure you know, is the importance to maintain some level of perspective and not get so consumed by what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I kind of promised myself like I'll never get back into a space where I'm so, engulfed by what I'm doing and it kind of defined by that. And not even a year and a half later, I feel like I'm back in the same spot. So that
Yeah.
has been difficult, but I do think that's just the nature of operating in an environment that's highly competitive. Is you kind of have to give your full self to that. Outside of that, I think having high expectations for yourself, which is great because you hold yourself to that standard and you push yourself to always get better. But I think sometimes you're hard on yourself,
Yeah.
again, I'm not alone. There's a lot of athletes I talk to struggle with that. And then the last piece I would say was just not having that experience that a lot of other people in business have because I was an athlete for so long. I wasn't, doing business since I was 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes I probably struggle a little bit from imposter syndrome, feeling like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit past my skis here, or I'm dealing with people that, are more qualified to be in the positions or in the rooms that I'm in. So those are probably the negative pieces of being a high achiever that I deal with.
Hey, this is Julie B, and thanks for watching the Game of Leadership. I'm here with Keith Marshall, and we're just talking about all things business ownership. And you said something, Keith, about imposter syndrome. And it's funny, I literally just recorded kind of a video. I sometimes I give myself pep talks. I don't know if other people do this, but sometimes I do. I talk about it sometimes, but I recorded a pep talk because I was getting myself fired up for this interview. So I'll have to send that to you when I send it out. But how do you, as a business owner, kind of overcome that imposter syndrome? Because it's a really hard thing for a lot of business owners. So I'd be interested to hear like how you manage that.
I mean, over time, I think that feeling of imposter syndrome maybe drives you to try to fix that, not fix it, but overcome that,
Yeah.
develop the skills to take it away. And so I think over time and being able to perform and hit your benchmarks and do things that make you gain confidence as you go.
Mm-hmm.
That helps me a lot. The other thing that I think helped me was when I was in Emory, I really struggled with it because, like I said, I was going in and I was competing against people that had, deep kind of industry expertise, and I was going and pitching for these big consulting gigs. And I didn't realize the extent to which my experience as an athlete actually transitioned to a lot of the core skills that they're looking for across more traditional business functions. And so I think understanding that, it's like, okay, I may not have the hard technical skills, but a lot of the intangibles, which is really what they want, the ability to work with a whole bunch of people, the ability to overcome difficult situations, the ability to focus. I actually exceed in a lot of these things. And I've been in an environment to foster those skills. And so I think kind of leaning on that has helped me as well.
Well, it's I mean those intangibles are the hard things to teach. A lot of the tangibles, P&Ls and balance sheets and learning about getting capital. I mean there are obviously some things you learn only through experience, but a lot of those things can be taught. But those intangibles, perseverance, determination, just grit in general, I find that a lot of the high performers, the competitors, they have that just ingrained in them. So I can see, why you got into Emory and why you succeeded there as well when you were getting your MBA for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I agree wholeheartedly. And it's again, it's one of those things that I wish more athletes. That's why I appreciate conversations and people that have platforms like yours. Because I think more athletes need to understand that. Because I don't
Yeah.
think there's a lot of feedback loops where people understand that hey, a lot of these skills are transferable. You're not done when you get done playing whatever sport that you play. So
Absolutely, absolutely. So, talking about getting back to the Players Lounge a little bit, Keith, what has been one of your biggest wins as an entrepreneur there so far? One of the things you're most proud of thus far there?
I think so. Again, more context about the space that we're operating
Mm-hmm.
in. NIL is brand new, and so it's the wild, wild west, is what people say. Everybody's trying to figure out how it's going to work, how
Can
it's
you
going to
can you
integrate.
just say what NIL stands for, just in case somebody doesn't
Absolutely.
know?
NIL is name, image, and likeness. And
Okay.
so for
Mhm.
years in collegiate sports, like, the university basically as an athlete owned your likeness. So they can go sell your jerseys, they can go sell commercials with you in it, they can do brand deals featuring you, and they got all the money. NIL basically allows student athletes to have the same kind of freedoms that professional athletes have in terms of going and getting brand deals based on their individual platforms. And so, that was a huge, huge shift in the collegiate sports landscape, from everything from the way that multimedia rights holders to universities and how they go make money to how university programs recruit and retain athletes. Like all of this has been impacted. And so, operating in a space that's that volatile and that new has been difficult. And so when you ask, what's the biggest win? I think the biggest win is probably still being here after a year and a half, where, if I look at the cohort of companies that started when we started, I mean, pretty much everybody's gone.
Yeah.
In terms of like, if I were to single out moments, I think the early success that we had once we kind of put a plan together, we said, this is our thesis, this is how we drive value, and then to go prove that and have kind of the market receive it the way that, really exceeded what we thought they would, was phenomenal. Handing kids those initial checks that were substantial, that was
Mm.
really cool to kind of see how excited they were, their ability to pivot. So I mean, I could go on and on about like
Yeah.
individual moments that I really think we're winning that we're proud of.
And there's an element that I'm loving about this too, because you're kind of teaching, you're also teaching these college athletes that you're showing them that they're actually a brand and that it's entrepreneurship. They may not look at it that way right now, but they are building a brand that whenever their athletic career is over, because unfortunately all athletic careers tend to end at one point or another. They will have built a brand, getting paid for it now, but also when their athletic career is over, they'll be able to probably capitalize on what they've built and go forward and start a business if they choose to do so, or get an amazing job somewhere probably. So it's just great. Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that whole idea of like delayed gratification, and you look at, kind of yourself as a brand. I don't know if many student athletes or kids or people in general see it that way. And so when I can say like right now you can go get paid if you position yourself this way, if you present yourself that way, I think you're teaching these young kids to engage in a way that's going to support them long term, as you mentioned. So
So, kind of on the flip side of your biggest success, what's a failure that you've had, or just something that maybe a mistake that you would have done differently thus far in business that, if you're willing to share about it, that maybe some other people can learn from?
I mean, I'll say like, I know people's mistake is, has a certain connotation, but I mean the learnings I'll say
Yeah.
have been significant from, how to go like when to go raise capital. Like we were so successful early on, we are like, hey, we're not gonna raise capital. That was a very naive thing because ultimately you never know what's gonna come down the pipeline. And the entire world flipped from a macroeconomic perspective. And then we were like, okay, now we need to go raise capital. And it was a much different environment. And so that was a learning that like kind of while you're hot is when you probably should go make sure that you have enough runway to get through, kind of whatever your next benchmarks are. Navigating the IP landscape has been difficult, just with all of the different big brands in college sports, and they're so protective over, the goodwill they've created through their trademarks and stuff. So navigating that has been interesting. And then I think, some financial situations where, we may have spent a little bit too much money here to try to execute on something that, again, the market changed, so it really wasn't even receptive to that. And so, the idea of not necessarily jumping all the way in, but testing and learning and scaling it to something is something that I've become much more familiar with and now practice much, much more than I did when we were first getting going.
Yeah, and that's those lessons. Sometimes you just have to learn them. And I mean, I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes running businesses for 15 years of spending too much here and there. And yeah, you learn them and you move on. I think that's the key, and I think that's the athlete coming out in you as well, is just that determination to keep going forward and not feeling too bad about it, but learning, moving forward, and getting better. That repetition and practice is so crucial.
Absolutely.
So, Keith,
Absolutely.
have you ever experienced burnout? That's one thing I like to ask, because I think those stories need to be told if you have them, because we're so hesitant to talk about it. But I think it's something a lot of business owners face, and I don't know if you faced it yet, but if you have, I'd be interested in hearing about it.
I think I have, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest with you, as a college athlete, everybody experiences burnout as well. I mean, that's as
Yeah.
demanding as anything you'll ever go through. And so funny enough, like it seems like every time where you feel like you're burning out and you're getting close to that edge, is like for me at least is when something big breaks. And then it's like, kind of this rejuvenation of energy and excitement and like, okay, you kind of paid your dues, you went through the difficult times and now you're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So yes, it's been point in times where I'm like, okay, I just want to go on vacation. I want to disconnect. I just, this is, coming to be a little bit more than what I bargained for, but I think that's part of it. And so I don't want to discredit people that struggle with burnout. Like I said, I've been there.
Hmm.
I've been very fortunate to be able to always overcome it. And it's like I said, it always seems to happen right around the time something big happens for me. So
Yeah.
um,
That's a common thread that, people tend to burn out right as something huge is happening. And then, I think there's the pressure relief valve there when they actually, the deal is closed, the money comes in, whatever it is, the partnership is born, whatever it is. But yeah, that's something, I interviewed somebody not that long ago who had just secured like $88 million in funding, and then he had a massive burnout and he couldn't work for like 3 weeks. So, that's the kind of stuff that happens in the real world in entrepreneurship.
absolutely. Well, you're right about, when that big, it's almost like I was telling somebody the other day, when you do have, you're in one of those difficult places and then, whatever the windfall you're waiting on happens, it almost feels like, having a big game or,
Yeah.
scoring the winning. Like, it's that kind of invigorating in terms of, I don't know if it's serotonin. I don't know what the technical term is, but that relief that you feel is real.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Hey, you're watching The Game of Leadership. I'm the host, Julie B, and I'm here with Keith Marshall, and we're just talking about all kinds of great things with business ownership and being a former athlete, starting a business. And Keith, one thing I wanted to ask you about is if you've experienced parallels specifically around leadership, because I know you've got a team at the Players Lounge now, and I'm curious about the parallels in the leadership roles from being an athlete to being a business owner. If you can speak to that at all, that'd be really interesting.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot as a leader in the locker room, which is the environment which I came from, there were certain things that, was important for you to do. One of them is to be able to, connect with people from different environments, to be able to bring everybody together around a common goal, to be able to create the environment to where obviously, people are not always going to see eye to eye, but
Hmm.
keep the main thing, which is like we're all a part of the same team. We're all moving towards the same goal. And so, one of the biggest things that I actually learned from my father, which used to get on my nerves, but
Of
he used
course.
to always say, he used to always say, do you want to get it right or do you want to be right? And I think that's one of the things that throughout athletics, and particularly when you're in a big team sport like football, it really happens naturally where you may not always get to be the star of the play or score the big touchdown or whatever, but as long as the team is moving forward, then everybody wins. And so trying to bring that lesson to what we're doing has been important. The other thing I think from a leadership perspective that again comes directly from athletes is the ability to take feedback and then incorporate that feedback and kind of do it very quickly. So when I think back to football, we watch film every single day, and the film, the eye in the sky don't lie, is what we used to say. So it's not to hurt your feelings, it's not to kind of poke fun at you, it's literally to get everybody better. And that's including the leaders themselves. And the leaders are typically the ones that are supposed to be the most demanding on themselves, to call the most out of themselves. And so I've tried to bring that to what I'm doing as well. And then the last thing and thing that I think I can do better at, to be honest, is just making sure that I put other people in positions to do what they're great at and then kind of take a step back. I think that's what great leaders are able to do. Great coaches are able to understand the talent they have on their roster and draw up plays and put them in positions to execute.
Hmm.
I think that's a very important skill that I'm currently cultivating.
So talking a little bit about putting the people in the basically the right seats on the right bus. What are you really proud of for your team at the Players Lounge, and even going back to playing football if you want to? But what are some things that you've been very proud of that you've seen your team accomplish over the
Well,
past year
yeah,
or
I mean, I'd
so?
say first and foremost, everything that I said that, I've accomplished or the players on accomplished, it happened because of the team. It's not obviously just
Yeah.
me. And so I think all of those things, still being around, being able to pivot, being able to have some of these major opportunities where we were the pioneer across different things that will drive a lot of athletes' value in the collegiate space, all of that was a part of the team. And I will give a shout out for my team. And the thing that's been the most exciting and what's allowed me to probably have success is the fact that we have so many different people with different levels of expertise, different levels of background and
Hmm.
experience. For example, my co-founder, he's maybe not the business development guy, but he kills it on content. Like he's as good as anybody that you need, and obviously you need both of those pieces. Then you got to figure out how to monetize that content and how do you scale that content. And we've brought people to do each of these functions that have deep experience, and I've been able to learn from each of them. So again, all the different functions and things I talked about that
Yeah.
I've had to experience over the last year, like my learnings and the ability to navigate those situations have come directly from people that are a part of the core team and me working with them to solve those issues. And so that's what I'm most proud of is just having all these people around that we can all feed off each other. We all have our strengths and we all know the direction that we're trying to go.
Keith, what legacy do you hope to leave?
Individually or the players lounge?
Let's go with both. Let's start with the Players Lounge and then individually. I asked
So
the
the
tough
players
questions
lounge,
here, Keith.
yeah. I like it. So the Players Lounge, we really want to be, a pioneer in the next generation of collegiate sports and entertainment. I think because the power that the athletes now have, we can incentivize them in a new way, and I believe doing so, we can create better experiences for those athletes. But more importantly, we can create value for all the stakeholders. So we can create better experience for fans, more immersive. Obviously, we can create more opportunities for universities to generate, fan
Hmm.
engagement and things of that nature. So I really would like for the players now to be at the forefront of the next generation of collegiate sports media entertainment in a way that, again, like empowers the athletes, give them a platform to speak their truth, share their perspective, and connect with their fans, like something we haven't seen before. Individually, it's interesting. I mean, I don't necessarily want to go super, super deep, but one of the things that I had to deal with, when to talk to people and et cetera, when you're coming out of being athletes, like figuring out what drove you so much. And for me, once I kind of unpacked that and peeled back the layers, it was like, one, the ability to do something that you're proud of and that, people
Hmm.
recognize you as being competent and being proud, and you get some level of social verification for doing something. Two is like, for me, I'm very fortunate, I understand the environment that my parents came from and their parents before them. And so kind of the responsibility to take that and pass it on to the next generation is something that, definitely, I don't want to say it weighs on me, but it's something that I'm very passionate about doing. And then I think through a vehicle like the Players Lounge, or being a CEO, or even being a professional athlete, there's an opportunity to impact the lives positively of other people. One, through being an example, and two, through like physical acts and using your leverage, using your influence, using your resources to bless other people. And so I think all of those things were part of why I was so excited to go try to be the best athlete ever. And I think all of those goals are still attainable, just through a new vertical now.
Yeah. Yeah. Keith, this has just been a great conversation. And as we're kind of coming to the end here, I just have one other question I want to ask you. So we've talked a lot about all of the things that have helped, you transition from being an athlete to being an entrepreneur. What do you think is the like number one leadership trait that has most helped you successfully transfer, from being an athlete to being a business owner? What's like the one top trait that you would say?
Mm, that's a difficult question. One trait. I don't know. I think this is a kind of embodies maybe multiple traits because it by itself will not allow you to be successful. But the one thing that I've always had, and it's kind of an ego thing to be honest, but this idea that like if somebody else, they say, okay, if you want to be a professional athlete, it's the 1% of the 1%. And that's supposed to scare people off.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that's always been like, okay, why not me? And if somebody else can do it, I can do it. Like I have that level of competitiveness to where when someone says something is difficult or is not doable, et cetera,
Yeah.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that allows you to, that focus that I talked about. I think it brings out that focus, that determination, the grit, all those other things.
Yeah.
And the ability, obviously, part of that is the importance of leaning on, which, the skills that you don't have from your teammates and such. So I think overall that, I don't know if that really answers your
Yeah.
question, but
It's having a little bit, it's having a chip on your shoulder and saying, just watch me. It's having somebody
yeah,
tell you no and then just saying, okay, just watch me. Let me prove you wrong. Now I get it. Yeah. It's not coming from like a negative space. That is motivation. There are people who are very motivated by that, and that just propels them to achieve the goals that nobody thinks that they can actually achieve, which is needed in entrepreneurship. I get that.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You said it much better than me. We'll say that.
I tend to do that. That apparently, I think if I had a secret skill, that's the skill. So, Keith, thank you so much, first of all, for being on the show. This has just been a fantastic conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it. Why don't you share where people can find out about the Players Lounge?
Absolutely. So you can follow us on all social platforms at the Players Lounge. It's Players Lounge because it's a little bit too long to get the whole handle. You can check out our website, which is theplayerlounge.io. And we're also on LinkedIn and everything. So all the digital channels that you could traditionally find anybody, we are there. We're making our stance, and we would love for you to come follow us as we continue to grow.
Keith, thank you so much again for being on today's show.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me and very much enjoyed the conversation.
And that is a wrap on this episode, but please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on any of these amazing conversations. I'm Julie B, and thank you for playing the game of leadership.